There's a specific way that smart, experienced professionals learn new things. It's methodical, it's thorough. It builds from foundation to application, slowly, until you feel ready. And for almost every skill you've developed in your career, it worked. But for learning AI, it's exactly the wrong approach. Not because the effort isn't real. Not because you're not capable, because the system was built for a different kind of skill, and you've been applying it to something it was never designed for. That mismatch has a name. And once you can see it clearly, the path forward stops looking like try harder and starts looking like something genuinely different. This video covers 5 specific signs that the mismatch is active in how you're learning right now, and what a structurally different approach actually looks like in practice. Think about how you learned the skills that built your career. You probably didn't jump straight into application on day one. You built context first. You understood the landscape before you tried to navigate it. You watched people who were further along. You moved from conceptual understanding toward practice, deliberately, sequentially. That instinct isn't a bad one. For most professional skills, it's exactly right. Learning a new software platform. Start with the overview, work through the modules, practice in a sandbox. Learning a new methodology. Understand the theory, see it applied, then try it yourself. Learning a new domain. Read widely, build vocabulary, develop judgment before taking positions. The pattern works because most professional skills reward comprehensive understanding. The more you know before you apply, the better your first applications tend to be. Your learning instincts were calibrated by years of that feedback loop. Here's what that means for where you are right now. The professionals who are finding AI integration hardest aren't the ones who aren't trying. They're often the ones who are trying the hardest in exactly the way they've always tried. Research on skill acquisition consistently distinguishes between declarative knowledge, knowing that something works, and procedural knowledge, knowing how to do it through repeated doing. Most professional skills allow you to build the declarative layer first. AI integration doesn't work that way. The procedural layer only develops through use. And use requires a specific task, not a general understanding. Your learning system didn't fail because you failed. It failed because it was the right tool for the wrong job. So here are the 5 signs, not as an indictment, as a diagnostic. The goal isn't to identify how far behind you are, it's to identify exactly which part of the system is misfiring, because that's the only information you need to fix it. Sign 1. You're learning tools before you have a use case. This is where most professionals start, because it mirrors how they've learned software before. Watch the overview, understand what it can do, then figure out where to apply it. The problem is that AI tools don't reveal their value in the abstract. They reveal it in the collision between the tool and a specific task you already do. If you've spent time learning what ChatGPT can do without attaching it to a specific piece of work, a report you write every week, a type of email you send every day, a document you produce every month, you've been building knowledge that has nowhere to land. The use case isn't the reward at the end of the learning. It's the starting point. Sign 2. You're measuring progress by what you've watched, not what you've changed. There's a specific satisfaction that comes from finishing a video or completing a module. It registers as progress. It produces a low-grade sense of accomplishment that feels earned. But if nothing about how you worked on Tuesday changed because of what you watched on Monday, the progress was in the watching, not in the integration. That's not a character flaw. That's what happens when the feedback loop is broken. The metric you're using, content consumed, doesn't measure the thing that matters. The question that actually tells you if you're making progress isn't, how much have I learned? It's, what is different about how I worked this week compared to last week? Sign 3. You're waiting to feel ready before you apply anything. This one is the most insidious, because it feels like conscientiousness. Feeling ready before you try something is responsible. It's how you avoid wasting time and producing bad work. For most professional contexts, it's the right instinct. For AI integration, it creates an infinite deferral, because the feeling of readiness never arrives through watching. It only arrives through doing. Specifically, through the moment a tool produces something useful for a task you actually had. Waiting to feel ready is, structurally, a way of never having to find out whether it will work. That's not a criticism, it's just the mechanism. And once you can see the mechanism, you can step out of it, deliberately. Sign 4. You're trying to learn AI in general, not AI for your specific work. AI for marketers, AI for finance, AI for everyone. Most of the content in this space is built for a broad audience. That's not a problem with the content creators. It's a structural constraint. Broad audiences require broad content, but your brain doesn't integrate broad content into specific behavior. It integrates specific demonstrations of a tool solving a problem you recognize as your own. If the tutorial isn't showing you something that maps directly onto a task you did last Thursday, the gap between watching and doing stays exactly as wide as it was. The more profession-specific the example, the shorter the distance to application. And most of what's available is the opposite of profession-specific. Sign 5. Every failed attempt makes you consume more instead of practice differently. This is the loop that sustains itself. You try a tool, it doesn't produce what you expected, you conclude you don't know enough yet. So you watch more, you learn more, you feel slightly more ready, you try again. It still doesn't integrate cleanly into your actual workflow. You conclude you still don't know enough. The loop feels like a logical response to repeated failure. But the failure isn't happening because of insufficient knowledge. It's happening because the practice itself is structured wrong. More consumption doesn't fix a practice problem. A different practice fixes a practice problem. Here's the thing that nobody says directly about this loop. Consuming feels like learning. It shares almost all of the surface features of learning. You're engaged, you're processing information, you're building vocabulary. You finish something and you know more than when you started. The dopamine that attaches to "I finished that tutorial" is real. The sense of progress is not a delusion. It's just measuring the wrong thing. And here is the mechanism underneath all 5 signs. Consumption is what integration looks like before you make it uncomfortable. Learning about a tool carries no professional risk. Trying to change a real work task carries exactly the risk that makes consumption feel safer. What if the output is bad? What if it takes longer than doing it the old way? What if a colleague sees it and asks questions you can't answer? The professional learning system that served you well for 15 years was built for a world where knowledge preceded application and readiness could be achieved in advance. AI integration inverts that sequence. Application is how readiness is built. There is no other route. And this is the part that actually matters. You're not behind because you haven't learned enough. You're behind because you've been learning instead of integrating. That's not a verdict on your work ethic. It's a description of a structural mismatch between a reliable system and a new kind of challenge. The mismatch can be corrected, not by watching more, by doing one specific thing differently, for one specific task this week. That is the entire correction, not a new platform, not a new framework. One use case, one task, one change that you can see on a Tuesday morning. If that correction is what you're looking for, a structured first 7 days that moves use case first instead of tool first, there's a resource in the description built exactly for that, not another course about what AI can do. 7 days of 15-minute sessions, each attached to a real task from your actual work, designed to produce one genuine integration you can point to by the end of the week. That's in the description. So what does the structurally different approach actually look like? It starts with a single inversion. Instead of asking, "What should I learn about AI?" you ask, "What is one task in my actual work that takes more time than it should?" That question gives you the use case. The use case tells you which tool to try. The tool gets tested against the specific task, not against a tutorial scenario. And the result, whatever it is, gives you real information about what to adjust next. Here's what that looks like against each of the 5 signs. Instead of learning tools before you have a use case, you pick the task first. Then find the one tool most likely to help with that specific task. Not the most powerful tool, not the most talked about tool, the most relevant one. Instead of measuring progress by what you've watched, you measure by one visible change in how you worked this week, even if the change is small. Especially if the change is small. Instead of waiting to feel ready, you accept that the feeling of readiness only arrives through doing, and you try the task before you feel ready, with the explicit expectation that it won't be perfect. Imperfect application teaches more than perfect comprehension. Instead of learning AI in general, you find examples, tutorials, and prompts that name your job title or your specific task. If the example doesn't map to your work, you skip it. Not because other content has no value, because specificity is what closes the gap. And instead of consuming more after a failed attempt, you ask a different question. Not "What don't I know yet?" but "What was actually wrong with how I set up that task? Was the prompt too vague? Was the use case too large? Did I try to use AI to do everything instead of one thing?" Did I give it enough context about my professional situation? These questions point toward practice adjustment. Consuming more points toward more consuming. The internal objection that's probably sitting somewhere in the back of this is, I've tried to change my approach before. I've done the challenges. I've committed to using a new tool for a month. It still didn't stick. Here's what's worth examining about that. Most different approaches to AI learning are still consumption-based. A different course is still a course. A 30-day challenge built around tool demonstrations is still built around demonstrations. A prompt library is still a list of things to read before you feel ready to try them. The structural alternative isn't a new form of consumption. It's a week where the first question is always, what real task am I attaching this to today? That's not a mindset shift. That's not inspiration. That's a behavioral rule that changes what happens on a Tuesday morning. If the video names something you've been in and you want the first 7 days of the structural alternative, the link in the description and the pinned comment is where that lives. The resource closes the gap this video opened. Which of the 5 signs landed hardest for you? And how long have you been in that pattern without realizing it had a name? You came into this video with a version of a question you may not have been able to articulate precisely. Something like, I've tried. I keep trying. Why does nothing change? That question deserved a real answer, not a motivational one. The real answer is this. The approach most experienced professionals use to learn AI is structurally mismatched with what AI integration actually requires. It's not a character problem. It's not a discipline problem. It's not evidence that this is harder for you than it is for everyone else. It's a system problem. And system problems have structural corrections. You now know the 5 signs of the mismatch. You know the mechanism that keeps the loop. There's a specific way that smart, experienced professionals learn new things. It's methodical, it's thorough. It builds from foundation to application, slowly until you feel ready. And for almost every skill you've developed in your career, it worked. But for learning AI, it's exactly the wrong approach. Not because the effort isn't real. Not because you're not capable. Because the system was built for a different kind of skill. And you've been applying it to something it was never designed for. That mismatch has a name. And once you can see it clearly, the path forward stops looking like try harder and starts looking like something genuinely different. This video covers 5 specific signs that the mismatch is active in how you're learning right now, and what a structurally different approach actually looks like in practice. Think about how you learned the skills that built your career. You probably didn't jump straight into application on day 1. You built context first. You understood the landscape before you tried to navigate it. You watched people who were further along. You moved from conceptual understanding toward practice.